Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are up to episode 6 of season 1 of DS9. This one is called Cueless. It was directed by Paul Lynch. Story goes to Hannah Louise Shearis. The teleplay goes to Robert Hewitt Wolfe, aired back on February 7th, 1993. In this one, Vash, a former love interest of Captain Jean-Luc Picard, arrives on Deep Space Nine trying to elude her companion Q and make a profit selling archaeological artifacts from the Gamma Quadrant, including a mysterious alien crystal. Anyway, Clay is here to talk about this one. How are you doing, Clay?
Good. I didn't realize Deep Space Nine turned Q into like a pervy Doctor Who.
Oh yeah. Well, this is Q's only appearance in Deep Space Nine, so you're blessed,
really?
Yeah, by having his only appearance on this show.
That makes me sad.
Does it literally make you sad, or is that just kind of a joke at this point?
No, it makes me sad.
Interesting.
Like for real.
Okay, so we are going to be talking about Cueless. I think we should start. Patron had actually asked that we talk about the theme music and the introductory credits, which we haven't done to this point because on TNG we only had really the one. TOS is kind of just nothing to compare to. So now that we're in,
we will talk about one theme. If you want to hear the rest, you got to pay more money.
That's right. So let's talk about
how much those themes worth, man.
Deep Space Nine is my favorite musical Star Trek theme. It's not my favorite sort of introductory visual theme that they go with. I think Voyager has like better visuals in the introduction. What do you think about the music for Deep Space Nine at this point? The theme song.
I'll be honest with you, it doesn't really affect me that much. I actually like the visuals because I was thinking about it. I tend to jump over them, but I actually was sitting down to pay attention to it this time. And they do something that I think is really important in the opening credits, and they do basically the equivalent of the 20-minute scene in the first Star Trek movie where they just show you the ship for an hour.
Yep.
And I think that's important to do in this for this show because their actual sets are so limited that you really need to get across the idea that they're on this sprawling space station. So spending the time to just sort of give you an exterior outlook of how big this thing is, I think goes a long way.
Yeah.
The music itself is not my favorite. I guess it makes sense because it's not really an adventure show the way the others were, so it's a little bit more subdued.
Yeah. I think I'd like to ask you your opinion of the music after we're done with the show, almost, because to me it feels the most thematically appropriate of the shows in a lot of ways. Like, if anything, what Deep Space Nine has done for me for TNG is kind of knock TNG. Like, I think TNG's introductory themes are now kind of like garbage at this point. Like, it's really not that good in my opinion.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I don't like the intro visuals kind of feel very like introductory Photoshop in a lot of ways. Like, it's just kind of like, here's Saturn, here's the moon, there's stuff like that. And the music just being a ripoff of the motion picture kind of does a little bit of damage to me, in my opinion. What's interesting is that, maybe we'll get into this more, but Deep Space Nine is really, not through the quality of the episodes that we've seen so far, but Deep Space Nine has actually it's made me more aware of how much TNG was just kind of a reboot as opposed to a new idea of Star Trek.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
TNG feels literally like TOS, only they're 100 years later, so everything is kind of updated more. Like, that's the extent of it, and it's very similar in a lot of ways, and Deep Space Nine is different. But yeah, we'll come back to it when the series is over. But the theme music is my favorite. The visuals, I think, are very good. They're interesting. It's nice to see the station, as you said. But I think Voyager has a little bit better thematic clarity with what it shows at the introduction of Voyager. So we'll take her from there, but that's it. I think the theme, they also redo this theme in the third season and it becomes much better. It's more orchestral and stuff like that. But that's about it. We're going to play an audio clip. Me and Clay are going to come back and we're going to break down Cueless.
You're right. This is an excellent idea. Cisco to us. All gone. Bring them back, Q. Now! thrash me? Shall we settle this mano a mano? Marquis of Queensberry rules! What? Fisticuffs, pugilism, the manly art of self-defense. Come on! Isn't this all wonderfully barbaric? Go on, take a poke at me. I know that's what you really want to do. Come on!
I'll wager 5 bars of Latinum on Cisco. You're on.
Fight back! This is supposed to be brutal.
You can pay me out of your profits from the auction.
You hit me. Picard never hit me. I'm not Picard. Indeed not. You're much easier to provoke. How fortunate for me.
All right, Clay. So we're 5-6 episodes into Deep Space Nine. This is your second episode.
What? I've watched all 5 of them in between.
So you got stuck with Q-less.
I know what's going on with Odo. I know he's my favorite character. I know what's going on with him.
You got stuck with Q-less at this point, and
is there a companion episode called Fewer Q?
There should be.
Yeah, there really should be.
Fewer. What's the other word? Less. It's the grammatical mistake is always saying less when you should say fewer and things like that. But I think less is appropriate in this.
My favorite joke.
Q-less is the 6th episode of this, so we've had 5 episodes so far. Hasn't been off to great acclaim so far, in my opinion. And then we end up with Q-less. So why don't you lead us off with your general sort of take on Q-less as an episode? Knowing that it's the only Q episode this series will do. I
feel like my whole feeling about this episode really comes down to the very first scene where the doctor is hitting on the woman.
Yes.
Because Miles O'Brien should have gotten an Emmy Award for the stink eye that he's given the doctor in that scene. And on another hand, that really kind of sums up my feelings about this episode. I kind of felt like I was making that face the whole episode.
Yep. I think that opening, we should focus on that opening scene for a little bit. It is the weirdest opening scene we've seen so far. What is the situation that's going on here? Why is O'Brien sitting in an empty cafe at the table right next to them, leerily, creepily watching Bashir go on a weird date where he's not even lying to this woman, but he's telling her a very unimpressive story and she's blown away by him.
Hey, man. He's a space doctor. It's all impressive. No, I mean, it's kind of that thing like if you're at a coffee shop and, you're trying to read the newspaper, but the person behind you is talking. And even though you don't want to, you end up listening to what they're saying.
Yep.
I feel like that's what O'Brien's doing there. And I can respect that because I'd be doing the same thing, especially if it was that I was listening to, because I would be just as confused listening to him talk about being
a medical test or whatever the fuck is.
And becoming salutatorian at med school or something like that. That actually, I really like that part where she was like, wait, hold on. Salutatorian? He's like, oh, but I mean, it would have been. I would have been valedictorian. But
they had a trick question on the test is his excuse. Yeah, that's the Bashir character, I think, in a nutshell at this point. And
is that all he does? He seems to be just like a horn dog.
Yeah, that's the early way that they write him. He does get much better, but he's pretty much the worst character at this point in the first season.
Cool.
So we've had a lot to go on him. I think that Q-less is, judging through all the episodes we've come to so far, Q-less is like the statement episode of the main problem that the show is having so far. So let me see what your thoughts are about this. The main problem outside of the pilot so far is that DS9 seems like a show that's not clear how much of a TNG clone it should be and how much of its own thing it should do. Mm-hmm. And they're doing a lot of what I would consider to be second tier TNG episodes very early, where they're bringing in characters from TNG. They're sort of doing these weird alien plot lines that aren't really built up at all. It's kind of just plot point after plot point until you get to the end of the episode. Mm-hmm. And the Q thing here feels like it's just totally stuck in as a, hey, TNG fans, maybe you should watch Deep Space Nine at this point, because I don't understand what Q brings to this episode at all. Like, I don't understand why he's in it at a certain point. And they don't even really focus on there are two good scenes in this episode to me, and I think this episode is terrible. It's probably the worst episode that we've seen so far. But
happy to be here.
The two good scenes are the Odo and Quark scene, where Quark and Odo are talking, because those are the only two characters that actually feel like this is a new series and this is a new interaction between characters. Mm-hmm. And the other one that's okay is, and it's not good, it's just okay, is the Cisco and Quark scene, Q scene, where they talk to each other and they turn into the boxing match or whatever.
Yeah.
That feels to me like if you're going to write this episode, make the episode about how Cisco interacts with Q differently than Picard does. Yep. Right? They don't do that whatsoever. They have that one scene where he punches him and that's the end of it. But outside of that, he interacts with them in basically the same way as Picard ever would. So what do you feel about that? And what do you feel about like Q's sort of necessary placement in this one?
Well, going off what I said before, I wasn't joking. This is a bummer that this is Q's only appearance, because I feel like Q deserves better than this. Maybe he doesn't. I didn't watch a ton of Q episodes from TNG, so maybe is he consistently this terrible every time he shows up?
No,
I can't remember.
This is probably one of his worst episodes.
Yeah,
but I mean,
that's what I figured.
It ties into, I'll just remind you, like the point I always make is that the worst Q episodes are the ones where he comes in as just kind of a trickster, and the best ones are the ones where his powers actually enhance the story because he allows people to do things that they wouldn't be able to do. And this falls squarely in the camp of he's just a trickster, and he's not even really a trickster in this one at all. He's just kind of there. Yeah,
he's really serves no purpose. I mean, it's like I feel like they used him for the hook, because when knowing it was a Q episode going in, I was like, all right, so at what point in the cold open is he going to show up? Because if you have Q, you always have to end your cold open with showing Q, so everyone goes, oh shit, it's a Q episode,
right?
Because it always works, because he's always at least on the surface an intriguing, interesting character to throw into the mix. Mm-hmm. But all he does in this episode is just try to get the girl to leave with him, and they really blow an opportunity, because that boxing scene, as silly as the boxing scene is, has that great line where he says, I'm not Picard, and then he says, what the hell does he say? I wrote it down.
He says, I know you're much more easy
you're much easier to provoke, which is fortunate for me. That was like, I was into it at that point. It's like, oh, this could be interesting, because that's an interesting you've never seen these two guys go at each other before, and
you can see how different of a character Cisco could be in this situation and all that stuff.
Yeah, and it seemed like they just brought Q in for a red herring purpose, and that's a really lame use of Q. You could have used literally anything else, and it would not have changed the story.
You're right.
And it wouldn't have made the story any better or worse, because he's just there to, like you said, because he's a recognizable thing from TNG, and he doesn't really have any bearing on anything. He doesn't help them do anything. He doesn't hurt them doing anything. He's just there to make it seem like it's going to be a Q versus Cisco thing, but then it turns out to just be an eBay auction.
Yeah, and I mean, I think his uselessness even ties into the Vash subplot. You didn't watch any of the Vash stuff, and I'm going to alternate between calling her Vash, which is the way it's phonetically spelled, and Vash, which is the way they pronounce it. But you never saw Cupid or Captain's Holiday, I don't think, from TNG.
I don't think so, because I was surprised that she's very attractive for a Picard ex-girlfriend, and not the kind that she's different than they usually are. Let's put it that way.
So she was a new character to you, right? You'd never seen her. So she did actually exist, and she was in episodes of TNG. Her relationship with Q, she goes off at the end of Cupid, which is her last appearance in TNG with Q, and Q promises the ability to explore the galaxy with him. She's an archaeologist, like thief / character, and she goes off to the Gamma Quadrant with Q, and they explore. And so this is their 2 year later thing. They come back, and Q is trying to convince her to keep going around the galaxy with him, right? I don't understand either of their motivations for why she wants to leave him and why he wants her to stick around with him, because he doesn't love her, right? I don't know what he gets out of taking her around places, and I don't understand why she wants to leave him when at the end she just reverses it anyway and goes off with him again like nothing ever happened from it. So what's your interpretation of why those two characters are bickering with each other?
Because it's something to do.
Yeah, basically,
I mean,
right?
I like, one of the things I really like about these spin-off shows is they allow you the opportunity to follow up on plot lines that you don't that seem like they're over on the other show. Like they did that a lot on Angel with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's always nice. It's always nice to see a story like that continued, but here they don't. I mean, that storyline has no bearing on anything other than an excuse for Q to do some parlor tricks.
Right. An excuse for them to be there in any kind of situation.
Yeah, like I said, they just kind of turn him into a pervy Doctor Who, just trying to get his companion to get back onto the TARDIS with him.
Right.
And honestly, if they had leaned into that would have been kind of cool. If they had got into the reasons that Q wants her around, because he doesn't need her around. What the hell does he need her for? He's a fucking god.
Yep. He says in the episode that he knows everything. So what exactly is he getting out of this?
There's they had an opportunity to do some interesting character stuff and maybe give you an insight onto Q's character, but they just want to grow a mustache.
Yeah, basically. I mean, the interaction between those two and their sort of whole storyline is really just this to me reminds me very much of it was Babel, the episode that we watched before this with Trexpertise, where the story just feels like a sequence of plot events. And I told Kyle in that episode, like, there's a difference. There's stories that are just plot events, and then there's like a story. There's no story to me in this episode. It's just a bunch of shit that's happening one after another thing, and like Q happens to be there with them. Well, ultimately coming down into the completely sort of arbitrary ending where this one device she's brought on is a creature from the Gamma Quadrant, and then it just flies off into the wormhole and it's never seen again.
Yeah, I was kind of, I didn't feel like there were any really discernible stakes going on here.
No.
Because clearly the energy sapping thing is a problem, but
it's another generic the station is going to blow up story.
Yeah. And when they zap the thing out into space and it turns into a giant jellyfish, everybody just kind of goes, huh. Which I guess it can't all be,
they've seen a lot at this point.
Yeah,
right?
I guess, yeah. And it takes a lot to impress them these days. But to speak to what you were saying before about how they're kind of stuck in that early TNG
I want to talk about this a little bit because I think that's the defining feature. So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think the issue is, as you pointed out, the best scene in the episode is the one with Odo and Quark. And the episode as a whole does just seem like a bunch of, events. And I think the issue is that you're basically, what we're watching through a TNG lens, excuse me, is we're watching the B plot of a TNG episode, but it's the entire show.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And the reason that is because DS9 is an ensemble show. There's no real, I guess Cisco was the lead, but it's like they're trying to go for making it more of a community thing.
He's much less. But he is much less of a lead than Picard is in TNG. Yeah.
And you didn't get that stuff in TNG usually unless it was a B plot, or if they were leaning into that, it was this kind of episode because they didn't really know how to do it. And I think here they're kind of leaning on that aspect where you're getting good character stuff to for some of these characters, but it's coming at the cost of the actual driving a plot because there's so many characters.
Yes, right.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it does, and I think that it like the interactions that are being driven, like there is a lot of sort of character stuff going on to me, but it feels. It's weird when you put Q as the interaction piece because when the Deep Space Nine characters are talking about Q, it doesn't feel organic to me. It feels in a lot of ways like this is a character that they shouldn't know at all, but yet they have a very familiar conversation with each other when he does appear, because the audience knows him. So
I really liked the scene where O'Brien was like, "It's Q," and Cisco goes, "Q, damn it." And then someone asks him, how do you know about Q? And he's like, I went to a seminar and they told me about him.
2 years ago. He remembered a seminar from 2 years ago.
Which is a bummer because part of the fun about Q is learning, is not knowing what he's about. And having Cisco not know what Q is about. That, I mean, if the episode, I guess it depends on how you.
Well, I mean, I'd have a hard time not believing that everyone in the Federation knows that there's a race of godlike creatures that they've encountered.
That's true. That's a good point.
But
I guess I'm thinking like if they had gone into more of this is really going a different direction than they clearly wanted to go in this episode. But I'm just thinking if you're putting Q up against Cisco, it would have been interesting to see like how Cisco deals with Q, thinking he knows what's all about Q, but you also have O'Brien there to be someone who actually has come in contact with Q, to be kind of like the one who's like, no, you don't understand what you're doing. He's just trying to trick you. That could have been a really interesting episode.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Like the Cisco thinks that he can sort of beat Q on his own terms, and O'Brien is the one who's like, oh, Picard did this. But the resolution of the story is showing how Cisco's different take on it can actually be effective in some ways. Especially
because he is so firmly established in the first episode, or at least the first 20 minutes of the first episode. He's got Picard as a sore spot for him.
Sure.
So to be compared to Picard, when it comes to Q, I could see that being an excuse for him to act rashly to prove that he is not Picard, and that it's that kind of thing. That could have been really interesting, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to go in the episode.
Read that story on my fanfic website,
we
DS9-clay.com.
We have a listener named Mercer. I forget his name, but his one of the names is Mercer in his username, and his sort of justification for early Deep Space Nine, or his sort of what he thinks about it, is that the stories aren't great at this point, but it's all about setting the scene for the new series. And I kind of agreed in the early episodes. This episode, I think, is a drastic failure because A, it has no story, and B, the character interactions are not good enough, except for Odo and Quark's type thing. So
that one... sorry, go ahead.
Well, we can talk about why that is an effective scene as compared to everything else. And I'll start off by just saying that the scenes, there are Odo and Quark at this point, and the actors who play those two have immediately built a chemistry. This is not their first scene that they've done together. They pretty much have a scene every episode because I think the writers realize that those are two characters they know how to write for effectively at this point. Mm-hmm. And the interaction between those two is unlike any interaction TNG ever had between two cast members.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
They know how to play each other in a sort of hostile but still friendly way, where they're antagonistic towards each other, but they're still chummy, but they also know each other's weaknesses really well and can poke each other a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that is not a character interaction that ever existed on TNG. There was no sort of needling. The worst you would get on TNG was Riker sort of being joking with Worf about something.
Or making that Riker face.
Right, making the Riker face. So,
my favorite face.
Why did you enjoy that scene? Because you agreed immediately when I said that was the best one in the show. So why did you think that?
Yeah, basically for the same reason. It was very different than anything you'll get on TNG. I should say very different than anything you'll get on TNG from major cast members. You get kind of stuff like that from guest stars or whatever, but like as far as major cast interactions, never anything like that. And the thing, excuse me if I don't. What does Odo do? Actually, I don't remember what he does.
He's the security chief. He's like he's called constable, okay. But he's the security chief of the station.
Well, I got the impression. Feel free to tell me that I'm wrong. That Quark obviously, but even Odo, they seem to both be sort of gray morally.
Yes,
and that is what made it really interesting to me. Is because you don't get two characters like that generally in Star Trek who are not played to be straight bad guys. To some extent.
Yeah, I'll correct it a little bit. Quark is definitely like traditionally gray. Odo has a very distinct code of his own that he does not. He doesn't sort of. He's big into rules, but he's big into his rules. Is kind of the way that Odo is written.
And it was just it was an interesting. It was an interesting conversation. Those two guys are really good together. They figured out what angle to shoot the Ferengi makeup on really well on this show. Because I don't know if it's just the actor's face plus the makeup, but like that makeup looks fantastic. And like when they get it at the right 3/4 turn, head tilted down slightly, and he's got like the really deep eyebrows, it looks great.
Yes, yeah. Armin Shimmerman is definitely the best at playing a Ferengi across the series, and he'll move on. But they definitely have recognized the best ways to actually film the makeup. Odo is still not looking great. He's looking better than he did in the pilot, but he's still not great in my opinion.
He looks like they had a better makeup like on the sculpt, but then they left it outside or something,
right.
And they just didn't have time to do it again. So like, just use it.
Or when they were peeling it off, it kind of got damaged a little bit, and they're like, just
exactly.
Stick it back on there or whatever. Yeah, I think that, and I agree that that's the strongest scene in the episode, and it's the only scene that's like this, because this episode, if you're going to tell me that these early Deep Space Nine episodes are about setting up the cast, it completely fails there, because no one is playing off against Q in this episode. Mm-hmm. It's very frustrating and very silly, and basically a complete waste of time.
And that scene, the scene with Odo and Quark, as good as it is, has no bearing on the plot.
It has nothing to do with anything. I don't even really know what they're talking about in that episode.
I don't remember either.
Yeah, it's like you remember it for being good, but it's totally unimportant to what the plot is. Yeah.
I guess he thinks he turned into the bottle that they were drinking out of.
They've exposed.
Odo's like, no.
They've exposed that Odo is spying on Quark by shapeshifting into things like that. That's basically which is another thing that Worf would never do. Right? That's not something Worf would spy on some other main cast member or something like that.
Arguably why he's not a very good security chief, because I feel like security chief, you got to do what you got to do to keep that ship safe.
Right, exactly.
I guarantee you Tasha Yar was spying on everybody.
Well, it's a good point that I mean, the reason they can get away with it, right, is that Odo is not Starfleet. So Odo exists in his own little bubble in a lot of ways.
That's why they killed her. I just blew it wide open. Tasha Yar was spying on everybody on the ship, and they had her killed.
Yeah,
she knew too much.
It was revealed in that hologram that she shot out at the end. That it's like, Riker, I've been going through your logs, and they get a lot to talk about.
They threw that in the trash before she got to that part. So.
It's that video of the kid talking to the YouTube videos, a little kid talking to Alexa, and he asks Alexa, the Amazon Echo, to do something, and it comes out with playing porn, and the parents are like, no, Alexa, turn off. Let's see, we talked about DS9 as a spinoff. So, one thing, my biggest regret about doing the pilot with you, right, was that I took for granted your knowledge of the Deep Space Nine universe in a lot of ways. And I think that it was interesting. The Emissary pilot was interesting because of your take of it as viewing it as like a TNG episode in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So here you see that the wormhole still exists, right?
Yes.
So
yep.
What's your opinion? There's not a lot to do with the wormhole and the Gamma Quadrant in this one, but do you have any sort of new understanding or appreciation for it, I guess, would be or do you see it in a new light, I guess?
Not really. It's just, I mean, it seems like it's just a device. I mean, at least right now, as it was used in this episode, it was just another story starting device. It was like,
sure, it brings in an alien.
The ship, they're drawing the ship out of the Gamma Quadrant. Was that coming out of the wormhole too, with the ship that they found at the beginning with everybody on?
Yes, yeah, that came back from the Gamma Quadrant.
Yeah, and then the space station itself was being drawn towards the wormhole, right? Is that?
I did not understand that whatsoever, why that was happening. I don't know why they were being pulled in. I don't know if something was trying to pull them in to get that alien back, or if the alien was trying to get back to the wormhole and it was pulling them in.
Well, I mean, regardless, that just sums up what the wormhole is in this episode. It's just a thing that services the plot for when they need something with tension to happen.
Yes, and it's actually kind of surprising how little we've gone into the Gamma Quadrant in the show so far. For this being a major device, we have not yet gone into there and explored anything. We've had alien races come visit us, but we haven't gone in yet.
Yeah, I was wondering if it felt to me in this episode like it was the Deep Space Nine was the island that Gilligan and the crew were on, and then the wormhole was like the ocean where everybody ends up the Harlem Globetrotters came through this week. It's where everything comes through. It's like, well, what's coming out of the wormhole this week?
Yes, that's what they're doing with it so far, and it's kind of shitty. It's not super interesting, and it's really, it brings up questions as to why they're not showing you what's going on in there. I think that they don't really have a good idea as to what's going on in it yet, but it also brings up something I wanted to talk about, which is universe of Deep Space Nine is now very, this sort of non-completely Starfleet thing is starting to show a couple of problems. We have a patron comment afterwards that I'll read, but the fact that Vash is a person going after profit, right? What is the driving force in this universe where everything is replicatable? Why do they still have a drive for this at this point? Like,
yeah.
In the scene where O'Brien is leading Vash around and he's like, oh, these are Cardassian quarters. She's like, oh, I used to sleep in a tent. He's like, wait till you sleep on a Cardassian mattress. They're terrible. It's like, why don't you replicate mattresses? Like, why is this? Why are they having a problem bringing the station up to snuff? Why is Bajor still suffering if they could just give them 1,000 replicators? It feels like everything would be fixed at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's always the problem with things like that. It's
well, I think
they are problem-solving devices that literally will solve any problem.
But I think the TNG universe was less obvious that there was a universe outside of Starfleet. You know what I mean? So the fact that now we're running into races that don't have these things, it's very weird that when they collide with Starfleet, there's not a lot more friction than you would imagine about these things going on.
Well, I was actually going to say, are there any episodes that are about the fact that only the Starfleet people can use the replicators and shit like that, or anything like that?
I don't know if it's about that. They do start touching on topics like that, but I don't know if it's specifically about the replicators. The replicators are just, like, to me, the most obvious thing here. Like, you know, the horrible scene where they're auctioning off the goods, which looks like it was shot in a basement of a high school for some reason. I did really like the 6-fingered joke, though. I thought that's very good. That it's just so, it's weird to me. Like, how do these things have value if whatever you need can be made for you? Like, why would you pay what seems to be money for these things? It doesn't make a lot of sense for me. Like, how are you making the money? Where are you going? The economy of Deep Space Nine basically doesn't make a lot of sense, is my point.
Yeah, it's an interesting setup to have the world outside Starfleet existing on a Starfleet base.
Yeah.
Where you have this cross of, there's the people that don't have all this stuff, but then there's Starfleet, who is like living the utopian dream, basically, or, you know, and has the replicators, has all the great medicine, all this kind of stuff.
They don't even get paid. Don't need to get paid. You know, it's so good.
Exactly. That's an interesting juxtaposition. So it would be interesting to see how they go forward with that, if they touch on that at much. Yeah,
they will. And I think I would wrap this one up. I was going to, you know, with your second appearance, ask you if you had any sort of updated opinions of the characters, but I think this is the wrong episode to ask you about that, because the only people we get a good look at are Bashir and Quark, I think, both who don't really come off very well because they get played by Vash in basically the same way.
Yep.
And that's
Bashir's the doctor?
Yeah, Bashir's the doctor.
Well, he doesn't get played by Vash. He gets played by Q.
That's true.
He literally, Q just tells him to go to bed.
He's gone.
And then he shows up in the last 30 seconds of the episode.
That almost felt to me like the actor got sick or something. They had to write him out. They're just like, just go to bed for the rest of the episode and that'll be fine. Yeah, I think it's just there's nothing really here for the character work, and it's just kind of a waste of Q. Did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap this thing up? It's really a terrible episode. I feel just dreadful that you had to watch this.
Hey, man, you know, I worked my way through it on TNG. I'm willing to do it within reason.
Yeah, okay.
for this one. No, I think we pretty much hit all the beats. It's an unfortunate waste of Q, and it bums me out because the B plot of the ship or the space station losing power and all that kind of stuff, I feel like in a good season of TNG would have been a fine backdrop to whatever character work they're doing with Q and with Cisco or whatever. So it bums me out that they couldn't follow through with that kind of episode here.
And what's weird to me is that these episodes that we've watched so far, this one is written by 2 TNG writers. So it's odd to me that there's such a schism in how they're writing for the characters. Or it's not even writing for the characters, it's writing plots that don't. And I think it really just comes down to the plots maybe this would be an okay, if you shot this in season 6 of TNG, maybe the cast and production at that point would have been pulled off enough to make it okay. At that point.
I don't know.
and here it's kind of awful because the characters are still up in flux and everything like that.
I actually, at first, when she first comes onto the ship and they're going through all of her stuff and they pull out the yellow glowing egg thing, for a second, I thought that was something that had shown up in the first episode, but
Oh, you thought it was the tear of the prof, the orb or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's what I must have thought it was. In which case, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. That could be pretty cool." But then it very clearly was not that. Kind of bummed out. But
there's so many orbs. Well, we can we'll wrap it up then. Oh, sorry.
Just to kind of piggyback off the thing you're saying about this was written by 2 TNG writers. The one thing I feel like I've learned after watching the original series, TNG, the movies, and then now this show, apparently, is if you want a good version, don't hire people from the previous version.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because the TOS people who wrote for TNG, that never really worked. The TNG people who wrote for the movies didn't really work. The TOS people who wrote for the movies didn't really work. And clearly here, I guess, that the TNG people writing for Deep Space Nine doesn't really work. That's only on a very small sample size. Maybe Ronald Moore, writes some killer episodes later. I don't know. Is he involved with the show?
He is. He comes on.
He is.
Yep. There are TNG writers who move over after TNG ends, and the show does better for it. So these are sort of the writers who are writing this early one are the sort of the writers who do like one script a season for TNG, like they're probably not writing staff. They're kind of just freelancers in a lot of ways.
Is there a really heavy Tracy Torme season?
There should be. It's been a long time since we brought up Tracy. He should write Royale Part 2, and we can all have a good time watching it. We'll wrap it up. We're going to give patron thoughts and then our final ratings, but I'm going to play an audio clip. Me and Clay are going to come back and finish off Q-less.
We only use a very small amount.
Do it. Unless we get this under control in the next 8 hours. We'll begin evacuation procedures.
Still chasing your own tail? Picard and his lackeys would have solved all this techno-babble hours ago. No wonder you're not commanding a starship.
Security to ops.
Well, aren't we the feisty little go-getter? I'd keep my eye on this one. Chances are she's after your job.
Why don't you do something constructive for a change? Like torment Cardassians.
Do I know you?
O'Brien, from the Enterprise.
Enterprise? Oh, yes. Weren't you one of the little people? Quite a motley crew you've assembled here, Benji. My advice to you is to evacuate now and save all this pointless guesswork.
Q, either you tell us what's going on or get the hell out of the way.
I'll tell you what's going on. While you're here conducting futile experiments, Vash is below engaged in base commerce and setting Federation ethics back 200 years. Believe me, gang. She's far more dangerous to you than I.
All right, Clay. So, as usual, I'm going to read some patron thoughts here. People have been posting on patreon.com/the File. If you're a patron, you can post your thoughts about the upcoming episodes, and I'll read them online or whatever on this podcast. So, Tark writes, Q-less. Vash on choosing between science and profit. I'll choose profit every time. Again, you can literally replicate anything you want. I kind of stole his point, but I really wish this didn't bother me so much, but Deep Space Nine draws your attention to the reality of the economy, and it doesn't make any sense. So far, Deep Space Nine isn't great on the whole, but it's watchable, certainly better than early TNG. Would you?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Would you agree that this is better than early TNG?
I was going to say, based on the early TNG episodes that I watched for the podcast, I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
Because they're not. I mean, I've only watched 2 episodes so far, so I don't really have a lot to go on. But they have yet to put their foot all the way down their throat like they did with something like Angel 1.
Yeah.
Or something that's just completely off the mark and completely design-wise preposterous or whatever. And if they feel like, it feels like they've learned from TNG to a point, but they haven't found their thing yet. They haven't found out. They haven't found what's going to make them excel. They're just kind of doing what they know works on TNG, for better or worse.
Yes, yeah. I think that the Deep Space Nine ones are just kind of the biggest thing you could put against them is that they're kind of boring. Like TNG, early TNG episodes were failures of television episodes. Like they just didn't make any sense and everything. The Deep Space Nine ones are really just kind of, they're either boring or they're just kind of like mediocre. Like there's nothing particularly memorable about them has been the experience so far.
Right.
Stephen writes, Q-less, I enjoy a good Q episode. This was great in that it showcased Q and Vash, but had little to do with the Deep Space Nine crew. The most significant moment was the boxing with Sisko and the comment of Picard never hitting Q. It definitely served to show that Sisko is a different commander than Picard. What I cannot figure out is whether it was a good moment or heavy-handed. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts about it. So what do you think? Is that scene good or is it heavy-handed?
I think it would have been good in a better Q episode.
Yeah, I think it had potential, but comes off heavy-handed. It was my take.
I will say that the fighting is terrible.
It's terrible.
It's terribly shot. And I don't know if I don't know if it shows that the choreography was bad or that maybe Q just actually has never had to throw a punch, being
omnipotent,
unkillable, omnipotent god. But the way that Sisko just like takes those punches is really weird. And also, theoretically, if he punched Q should just like phase through his fist, or I don't know.
Yeah, it should be very Matrixy. But
throw it all out.
I respect that he gave him that. It also it gave Avery Brooks a chance when Q turns him into the boxing garb and they're like about to box. It gives Avery Brooks a chance to do one of his high pitched yelps when he goes, "What?" Whatever. So that's always good that they give him a chance to do that.
He's so fascinating because the character is so tightly wound, and he clearly is not.
No,
that he's just dying to inject life into this character, and there's just any tiny crevice he can find to squeeze through, he'll take.
Yeah, well, he'll be interesting going forward. I'll leave it at that. So Kyle B writes, Q-less, the plot of the episode doesn't justify having Q in it. It's clear that they just had to cram Q in an episode, and his stalker-style infatuation with Vash doesn't make much sense. While I don't like the episode very much, I'm glad it exists in its current form with the multiple TNG-style story points, Q, Vash, and even one of those space jellyfish, because it showed early on in the season's run that this wasn't the show the writers could tell those stories in. While TNG took a few seasons to find its feet, it takes DS9 just one season, and learning from failures like Q-less is why. Also, any episode that begins with a joke about technobabble the series uses before falling back on a technobabble in the final act is hard to like. I agree with that. Q actually makes a joke about the technobabble at a certain point. And I agree totally with that. I think this episode is a failure of an episode. It's the worst one I've seen of the first season of Deep Space Nine so far. But guys, thank you very much for leaving your thoughts. It's very much appreciated. There's a lot more coming forward. I think people had to catch up with the system of how we're doing it, but we'll have a lot more comments for the episodes in the future. Final thoughts and ratings. I'm going to give this one a 1 out of 5, Clay. I think it's very bad. I think it's a waste of Q. I would have rather never had Q in this series than have this episode. And it is a failure of storytelling, it's a failure of plotting, and it's a failure of scripting. And the performances are trying, but the script doesn't really give them anything to do. The glimpse that we get with Odo and Quark is really the one bright side one to me. How about yourself?
Well, as you said before, my barometer is still kind of geared towards TNG.
Yeah.
And if this were a TNG episode, I'd probably give it a 2. But because it's like it's boring, but there's nothing like horribly bad about it. It's just sort of bleh. But I agree with you. I would have to go with a 1. I'm gonna follow your lead on this, but also because I mean, if it's a waste of Q, the story is completely pointless and it doesn't really move anybody forward.
I mean, I think I would say that the script here is a terrible script. Like there's really no story here, going on. Like if you were to say that it would be pulled off in TNG or be a 2 for you in TNG, I think my counter would just be that I do think this is a legitimately terrible script. It's boring, but it's also completely pointless. It doesn't have a huge fuck up or anything in it. Like there's no glaring errors in it, but it's just like you got to tell a better story than this. This is just really bad.
I think it could have used at least another 10 minutes of talking about different amounts of money.
Yes. little gold plus, or 10 minutes more of the Umox, which is when she's rubbing Quark's ears.
Yeah.
And he basically orgasms in his pants and lays there. But I was that's something when I watched this when I was younger, I wouldn't have really appreciated how much that's basically just her giving him a hand job. And like there's nothing really, not really hiding anything right there.
I noticed in the first episode, and she comes back in this episode, that one alien waitress who's wearing like a shirt that just comes down to like right below her nipples. And like, so you get under boob and like a whole stomach. And how did they get that on TV? That's a pretty risque for Star Trek. That's the most risque thing I've ever seen.
It was blurry. It's like you say, everything looks blurry and washed out in these early episodes.
That's true.
And yeah, they do get better with the set design too. So you can look at like the lighting of the show improves
it's so
drastically.
Dark. Yeah, it's so dark.
Yeah. So that's something to look forward to. But you'll give it a 1. I'm going to give it a 1. I think it's the worst episode that we've had so far this season. And
happy I could be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It does get better at some point. Like Kyle B said, it's really only the first season that is difficult. They pick up themselves quite well after that. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening. You can check out all the social media stuff. All the links are in the podcast or the video description. Only thing I'd ask you to check out is patreon.com/thepenskyfile. If you want to support the show, you go there. We have a lot of patrons. We now have like 50 patrons. It's kind of incredible. Everyone responded very favorably to my begging in the before that we started this series. But hopefully
time to jack up the rates.
That's right. The rates are going up. Yeah, but thank you very much, patrons who are there. Hopefully you're enjoying the patron content, and people who don't support the show currently, you might as well check out Patreon, see what's over there for you, and see if it's interesting. And as always, the captain level supporters on Patreon, I'm going to list off. It's Stephen K, Ben D, Tax Owlbear, Kyle B, Joint Mango, Vincent Adultman, Doug V, and Tark L. Guys, thank you very much for supporting the show. It's greatly appreciated. Clay, thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back, and if somebody had to watch this, I'm glad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's a tough sort of sell here. I mean, I look at the future episodes, and it does get better relatively quickly. It'll be interesting. You'll have a couple more episodes in the first season, and you have the first sort of what's considered to be one of the great episodes of the show.
I think I've earned it.
Yeah, probably.
I would like to say one thing before we end out is 2 costume notes. I really appreciated Q upgrading his costume to the DS9 costume, even though I did like that he showed up in the TNG costume.
He even has a line about it. He mentions the tailors have improved. Yeah.
And also, O'Brien with his sleeves rolled up is the best version of the costume ever. That's my favorite thing I think I've ever seen, is the fact that he can roll his sleeves up and still look like he's in Star. It's great. It's just a great addition.
It works for the character too. It's like the perfect.
100%. Yeah.
It's such a small change, but it's like perfect for the O'Brien character that he walks around with his sleeves rolled up. I agree. But you have 17 bad episodes before you get to your good one, so you'll be back for those.
Excuse me?
And then we'll eventually go through the wormhole at some point. But guys, thank you very much for listening. Clay, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Guys, we will see you next time with, what is the episode after this? Dax. I wonder what that one's about. See ya.